Infantry are the type of unit where if you do them wrong, you're going to get a bunch of bad trades. But if you use infantry really well, you're going to get some insane trades. So today, I'm going to be updating my infantry investment plan, going from the earliest stages of the game all the way into Season of Conquest. I'm going to look at skills, I'm going to look at commanders, I'm going to look at equipment, I'm going to look at civilizations, city skins, everything you need to know about infantry. So if you at all want to be an infantry main, or maybe you already are an infantry main and you just want to find a way to maximize your trades just that little bit more, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Quickly before we begin, keep in mind there will be timestamps in the description today, purely because I am going to be going through different stages of the game. Now, I do recommend watching the whole video because you are going to get a bunch of small little information that is going to help you when gathered all together. So I'm going to give you advice each KvK how to make infantry as strong as possible, and some of that stuff carries all the way into the end of the game. With that out of the way though, let's begin with your earliest stages of the game as someone who plays infantry. Very simply, the first thing you want to do, everything you put just straight into Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is easily the strongest epic commander in the game by a very large mile. There's almost no commander in the game that's an epic commander that's even next to Sun Tzu's strength, because he is just ridiculously powerful. So for the earliest stages of the game, I don't care what commanders you're running with Sun Tzu, just run a Sun Tzu. That also means really early game you want to get the China civilization, because you're going to get extra Sun Tzu sculptures, and by the time you start KvK 1, you most likely won't have enough gold heads to expertise 2 legendary commanders, so you probably want to be running a Sun Tzu. So starting with China, not only is it a good starting civilization in general, you also get Sun Tzu, obviously, which means it's going to be very easy to get more sculptures for him. I think in total, if you do all the quests, you get something like 300 to 400 Sun Tzu sculptures, pretty much enough to expertise him. Maybe it's 200. It's a really, really high number, so really you could just expertise Sun Tzu and use him in KvK 1 with the commander pairing. So Sun Tzu, really, really good choice to start off with. Choose China, it's going to be very powerful. As for a secondary in the early game, I mean, you shouldn't be getting into many fights in the early game. You mainly just want to focus on developing up your city. But if you are getting into fights, you need to use commanders. Sun Tzu with any of the epic commanders, whichever one you have at the highest skill level would be fine. Bjorn Ironside, probably the best option. If you have access to a legendary commander, you probably would want to run a Sun Tzu with a Charles Martel, because you won't have access to Richard just yet. So Sun Tzu with Martel is a fine option as well, or a Sun Tzu with a Pyrus is bearable. Not as good as Martel in my opinion, because Sun Tzu is a skill damage commander, and Martel, even though he isn't really skill damage based, tends to work a little bit better, also because of his tankiness. Pyrus, he's a bit more punchy, but in my opinion, he isn't going to be the most overpowered for the early stages of the game, because you want to get a bit further into Pyrus's kit, whereas Martel, you can probably get away with just having his first skill maxed, because of how strong and how tanky he does end up being. So Martel with Sun Tzu in the early game is fine if you have his first skill maxed. Otherwise, just rock one of the epic commanders with him and you're going to have a fine march. So Sun Tzu, really important early game focus. Other than that, for the main parts of the early game, just focus on getting your economic tech up, because it's going to make you even more powerful, and then just doing stuff occasionally working towards new infantry. For example, getting to spearmen, and then eventually getting to the long swordsman before you start KvK 1. Shouldn't be too hard to do all this, mainly because most of these research things you're just going to end up doing anyways, but focusing in on infantry stuff is important. So for example, if you're going to be using infantry, max out buckler, but don't max out leather armor. It doesn't make sense because it's for archers. So focusing on the infantry tech, just going to make you even stronger. That's a small thing to do. No matter what troop you're maining, just focus on the right technology, and you're going to be able to get even more strength and even more value out of each troop that you use. The last thing for early game is equipment. Really simply, with infantry, they don't really have an early game equipment set. Just put anything you get on. So for example, any equipment that you can get access to with some level of infantry stats, maybe it's the boots of reverence, or you've got the common legs, or not the common legs, maybe you've got the ranger trousers. Anything you get access to that's going to give you infantry stats, just put it on your commanders. You can dismantle it later. You should have more than enough gold in the early stages of the game. So when it comes down to it, any equipment you can get access to is perfectly fine. If you need to get some specific blueprints, some stuff to focus on, Gatekeeper's Shield is number one. It's probably the strongest infantry piece of equipment in the whole entire game, especially value-wise. So if you get any blueprint choice chest, especially for a weapon, try and get the Gatekeeper's Shield. It is going to be the most valuable piece of equipment that you can get access to. Now, moving on to KvK 1, at this point, you're going to get access to a few more commanders. You're going to get access, really, to, at this point, you'll definitely have access to Martel. You're going to have access to Richard. You're going to have access to Pyrus. And you are also going to have access to a non-infantry commander that I am going to be talking about today, YSG. Now, there's many ways you can go with all these commanders that you have access to. The main way I recommend is just getting a Richard and running a Richard with a Sun Tzu, and it's going to be a fine march. You've got a very tanky commander, Richard, and Richard is pretty much KvK 1 meta, and you've got Sun Tzu, very punchy damage. Other option, Martel with Sun Tzu if you get Martel to a decent skill level, and because now we've got the commander swaps and all those nice things, you can swap Martel later on. So Martel with Sun Tzu, in my opinion, perfectly fine march. It can work really well, and technically it's better in terms of investment, because whenever you transfer a gold key commander, even the gold heads that you gain from opening the commander out of the gold keys count towards the new commander. So really, you're gaining extra gold heads from just opening your gold chests. So technically, Martel is an overall better investment. If I was in the situation where I had to pick, I honestly would run a Martel, again, because I get access to his gold heads from the gold keys. It's 30 or 40 sculptures, maybe even more by the time you hit Season of Conquest, that you get to save. Considering there's some events that come around that's going to give you Martel sculptures, considering that you can get him from gold keys, he can show up in Expedition Shop, all these real easy ways to get free sculptures, they're going to help you when it comes down to choosing your new commanders once you do hit Season of Conquest. So Martel, in my opinion, is a better investment, funny enough, which I never thought I'd be saying because he is a gold key commander. But if you don't want to use Martel, because in my opinion is a bit weaker than Richard, go with Richard, he is going to be pretty good, and then just run them with a Sun Tzu. The other option is you can run a YSG with a Richard, with a Martel, even with a Sun Tzu or a Pyrus. Now, the reason I mentioned YSG, he's easily the most powerful commander in the early game because he's so generic. Besides one skill on his kit that is archer based, he can really be run with any commander and it's going to be fine. Now, if you're running with Sun Tzu's got to be the primary, so you have access to the archer, the infantry talent tree. Keep in mind though, Sun Tzu primary tends to get targeted. So Sun Tzu with YSG, it's questionably effective. You can definitely run YSG though with a Richard in a KvK 1 situation, and you're going to be perfectly fine. It's a very strong march. It's going to trade pretty good. Same thing with Martel. Same thing with Pyro. So if you've got a bit more gold heads, maybe you spent some money, running YSG with Richard, Martel, or Pyrus, whichever commander you do choose, is fine in my opinion. Minimum for any of the legendary commanders at this point, you want to have him at 5511. Same goes for YSG. Preferably, you've got 3 skills max. So Richard, like his first 3 skills. Martel, you want to have his first 2 skills and his 4th skill max. And then Pyrus, just having his first 3 skills max works as well. Same thing with YSG, except YSG is similar to Charles Martel, where you just want to have his first 2 skills and his 4th skill max. Eventually, though, if you get YSG, you do want to expertise him because his expertise does make a really big difference on the open field, especially when you're fighting other players. In terms of your civilization for KvK 1, you're definitely going to want to switch off of China at this point. Don't worry, if you switch, you can still get access to more Sun Tzu sculptures. It doesn't change the commander that you get, and it means it doesn't change the missions that you do. Really, in terms of the open field for infantry, I'd probably go France in the early game. Reason being, A, troop health is nice, B, the throwing axeman's a decent unit, but C, hospital healing speed is going to be really good. That's because you don't get access to the massive hospital healing speed buff, which you get at VIP 15, that 50% healing speed buff. You don't get access to that if you are in the really early game, unless you're VIP 15. But generally, I think France is a really good option. If you do not mind using more speed ups on the hospital, you can go with the Vikings. They're going to be a little bit stronger. You're going to get more counterattack. You're going to get more infantry attack normally. And the Berserker unit is also pretty good. It makes you quite a tanky, at least a bit more tanky of a march, and it is annoying to damage. So in my opinion, Vikings or France is the best option for the early game. Other option is Ottoman Empire. While this, in my opinion, could be even better, you are missing out on the special unit, so arguably, if you're only running infantry, it isn't as good. So Ottoman Empire, probably I wouldn't do, but for the sake of your KvK 1, Vikings or France, in my opinion, would be the go-to. I personally would go with France because of the hospital healing speed, even though it might be a bit weaker, and you do get some health as well. So I think France, best option for KvK 1, though I think Vikings would be a close contender and arguably could be better in terms of that counterattack. But in my opinion, I would go France as your KvK 1 civilization. In terms of other stuff, such as equipment, really at this point you want to have mostly blue equipment. You need the Gatekeeper's Shield. It's such a good piece of equipment. If you don't have it yet, you're going to be in a really tough situation KvK 1. So get the Gatekeeper's Shield no matter what. If it means having to do a bunch of events to get the shield and get the fragments for it, trust me, do it. It's the best piece of equipment you're going to get in the early game. Talent it as well, and you're in a really good position. In terms of a epic set, or the rest of the blue set, generally you're just going to run run the windswept set because A, infantry are slow, so giving them more march speed is nice, and B, the windswept set is pretty much all infantry stats as well. So windswept generally is going to be a really good option. There aren't really many other blue pieces of equipment that are going to fit infantry too well because the windswept set is kind of just made for them. So overall, run that windswept set and you are going to be in a very solid position. So windswept set with the Gatekeeper shield, and then any accessory you can get access to. Usually in KvK 1, you get Call of the Loyal, and again, that's just going to make you even faster. The last tip for KvK 1, if you're an infantry main and you're not running any other troop types, try and focus on gathering corn or food, and focusing on gathering a bunch of wood. The reason being, infantry only use food and wood whenever you're healing them, and if you're not running cavalry and if you're not running archers, you don't need any other resource type. So just running wood or just trying to gather wood and also trying to gather food is really good for you. The reason being, you can maximize the amount of resources you get that are useful to you instead of gathering stuff like stone or gold, which you might only need in small amounts, and you can often just use your resource tokens for that. So in my opinion, picking up as much food as possible and add as much wood as possible is going to benefit you the most if you are playing infantry and you are an infantry main, because if you're only running infantry, you don't need any other resource type, since infantry will only use wood and food when healing and also when training. Obviously, you need a bit of gold if you're running T4. Most people should be running T4 by now, and you might need a little bit of other resources for archers or cavalry that you might put into flags and stuff, but generally that's going to be a small amount. So just focus on your food and focus on your wood, and you're going to be in a very solid position. Moving on to KvK 2, this is where we get access to another legendary commander that's going to be good for infantry. Alexander the Great, easily the best infantry commander in the game up until you reach Season of Conquest. The reason being, Alexander the Great is just insanely powerful. He's got a crazy skill kit. I'm not going to go through it all. I've probably got an Alexander the Great guide on my channel. He just is really, really good for the early game. In my opinion, he's a must pick up for pretty much any infantry main. The only time I wouldn't pick him up is if your Martel is at a really good skill level, because you can still get away with a Martel or YSG. Same thing with Richard if he's a really good skill level. But if you did, if for some reason choose to skip them in KvK 1, then you can definitely go and pick up Alexander the Great, and he is going to be in a good position. Alexander the Great with YSG is easily a meta pairing if you did do that. If you only invested in Sun Tzu for the early game, so let's say you only picked up Sun Tzu, then you can easily get Alexander the Great. You can run Alex with Martel, and it is a really good march. Alex with Richard is debatable. It's not the best, but it's also not the worst. So in my opinion, Alex definitely a must pick up for every infantry main, unless you already have a YSG with a Martel or Richard, because that marcher is going to be fine. I still do think that if I was in the early game position, I'd pick up Martel first, because Saladin comes into KvK 2, and by then he can counter healing quite good. But if you are running a Richard, you can still get away with him. And if you're running a Martel with an Alex, it's going to be a fine march. So really, just having access to a Martel is going to be really good. And if you have access to just YSG, you did YSG with Sun Tzu, putting YSG with Alex is going to give you the best march possible for KvK 2, because Alex YSG is absolutely meta. It is insanely good. In terms of KvK 2 equipment, generally what you're going to do is keep the Gatekeeper shield and just work towards some legendary and work towards some of your epic pieces of equipment, which is Lineage is an epic piece. You've also got access to the Quinn Soul. You've also got access to the Infantry Epic Gloves, which these are not the best. The Seth's Brutality, sorry, these are better than the other pieces, the Seth's Brutality, because the other pieces we looked at are mainly attack. So really focusing on the infantry equipment that you get access to. You're not going to really be able to pick and choose your pieces of equipment, but really focusing on infantry stuff that you get access to is really good. If you can get access to the Kuruk's Humility as one of your first pieces that you upgrade to, so going from the Windswept Legs the Sentry Braces up to the Kuruk's Humility is really good, because you're going to get access to 8% health, and this is arguably the best epic piece of equipment for infantry. Really though, just moving towards your epic pieces, it's going to put you in a good position, because infantry, as you go, and because with equipment, as you upgrade it, obviously it is going to get stronger. Now, the infantry best set, if we just did a quick breakdown, it would look like this. Gatekeeper Shield, with the Witch's Lineage, with Quinn Soul, with the Seth's Brutality, then you're going to put Kuruk's Humility on, and finally you're going to use Frost Treads. That's really the best epic set of equipment, and over time you can just upgrade that to legendary pieces. So for example, if you get access to the Hope Cloak, you can upgrade to the Hope Cloak. You can also upgrade to the Eternal Night at some point. These pieces of equipment are all powerful and they're going to be good. Now that's a bit later. Obviously you want to focus on legendary equipment when you get access to it, but making sure you got a full epic set, preferably talent some of the more important pieces, talenting the Gatekeeper's Shield, talenting the Kuruk's Humility, both of those things are going to be a really good upgrade to your equipment and make it even stronger. So now that you've made it out of KvK 2 and you've made it to Season 3, it's time that we look at your commander swap. Swapping one commander into another, and really simply, you've got two options you can go down. Option 1 is going with smite damage, option 2 is going with skill damage. Now, in my opinion, I would personally go down the smite tree because I think that Lilith is going to focus a bit more on smite. I think smite is the new thing for infantry, and while I think infantry may still be receiving skill damage commanders every now and again, I expect that we see more smite commanders. But generally, if you're going to pick either one, this is what you would do. If you go down the skill damage tree, which is currently, as of recording, better than the smite damage option, if you go down and you get the skill damage commanders, you want to get Ragnar and you want to get Scipio Africanus. They're both 2 meta, very powerful AoE commanders, and they are really, really good together. So running this march is going to be very, very good for you, and it's going to be extremely strong on the field. Double AoE, insane stats, really good debuffs, very strong commanders. They're going to be the main one you swap into. So swapping into Scipio, swapping into Ragnar, really, really good option. If you only have the ability to expertise one of the 2 commanders and the other one is like at a 5-5-1 skill level, you probably want to expertise Ragnar over Scipio. So if one of your commanders from KvK 2 has lower skill levels than the other one, then you just want to put the most amount of sculptures you can into Ragnar, because Ragnar is going to benefit more from his expertise than Scipio does. Scipio has a really good kit overall, but Scipio's expertise is probably the weakest thing in his kit, so it's not the most important. Ragnar's expertise, though, is extremely powerful in my opinion. It's not essential to his kit, but it is a really, really good thing, and it's something I personally would try and get to if you can. If you are looking to go smite damage, William Wallace with a Leo chip. That's all you need. Perfectly fine march. If you get to choose between one expertise, go with Leo Chez's expertise because he is going to give you better stats and better damage out of it. The fact he can launch an extra combo attack is really, really good, and the fact that he's going to be able to launch another basic attack is really nice. So if you get to choose one expertise, go with Leo Chair, and then just focus on William. William, similar to Scipio, his expertise is decent. It's actually arguably better than Scipio's, but it's not the most OP thing in his kit, and he's got more strength in his other skills. So getting William up slowly over time and expertising Leo Chair first is going to be the best option for you if you are going down the smite option. And in my opinion, perfectly reasonable, perfectly valid, and they are both going to be very, very strong marches. So now that we've made it to Season of Conquest, we've pretty much got access to all the legendary equipment in the game, and this is, in my opinion, the best set of equipment you can get. First of all, Helm of the Conqueror. It's a really, really good piece of equipment. It's the same price as the other helmets now because it has been changed. Getting the Hammer of the Sun and Moon, getting the Hope Cloak, getting the Leadership Leggings. I was just checking my infantry guide. The Chassis of the Glorious Goddess, and then finally getting the Greaves of the Glorious Goddess, and I forgot if I mentioned the Sacred Grips. They're all going to be really good sets of equipment. So the quick investment order I would go in, first of all, I would actually probably go and get the Hope Cloak. It's a really, really good upgrade from the Quinn Soul because Quinn Soul absolutely sucks. Then I would try and get the helmet, the infantry helmet, because it is a very decent stat upgrade from the previous Witch's Lineage. After that, I would most likely go and try and get the Chassis of the Glorious Goddess. Then I would go and get the Sacred Grips. Then I would then get the Greaves of the Glorious Goddess. Greaves of the Glorious Goddess really aren't that amazing because it's not a very big health upgrade over the Kuruk's Humility. It's technically a small health downgrade if the Kuruk's Humility is talented, but you do get access to another 3% defense, which does make up for it. So it's not the biggest upgrade, but it is a small upgrade nonetheless. Not to mention you can iconic this equipment and make it even better. But Chassis of the Glorious Goddess are going to be like your 4th or 5th piece. And then the final thing you're going to get is the KvK weapon, because the Gatekeeper Shield is just that good. It's just so powerful that while the KvK weapon is better, it's just the most expensive piece of equipment, and you'll just do it last because it is only a small upgrade and not as big as the other ones. In terms of your accessories, generally, Horn of Fury with the Ring of Doom is perfectly fine, and it is the current meta combination for pretty much every march. So Horn of Fury, Ring of Doom, and you're going to be in a very good position. So that is it for the video today. We've gone over everything about infantry from the early game to the late game, the best commanders, the best equipment, and also some civilization, research, and even resource gathering tips. So if you found any of that stuff useful today, please do consider subscribing to the channel. I do try to make up-to-date guides for almost everything in Rise of Kingdoms as early as I can. So if you found today's video useful, subscribing is really helpful to me. And if you end up not liking my videos, you can always just unsubscribe. Other than that, I just want to say I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.